From the global news network of Breitbart.com, this is Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow on SiriusXM Patriot 125.
As I always say, if you're thinking twice, give it a shot. Supporting the sponsors helps keep the show going and growing. All right, welcome back to the broadcast. New guest for you. Hayden Ludwig is with me, investigative researcher at the Capital Research Center, who are great supporters of Breitbart. And we got a big story going up. We'll be part of a series of stories looking into a group called Arabella, which is a dark money group that's funding left-wing projects, $500 million nonprofit. It's a huge empire creating tons of these fake groups that are sort of pop-up groups, and it's all a cover for some left-wing individuals who are trying to push agenda, and they're doing it without a lot of scrutiny. And Capital Research Center, where Hayden works, is they're looking into it. They've got some stories they're going to be launching starting today at Breitbart.com. Hayden, great to have you on.
Great to be with you, Alex.
Okay, so give us first of all, give us the 30,000-foot overview. Who are Arabella Advisors? What are they doing? How much money do they have? And what are their hopes and dreams?
Well, the first thing you have to know about Arabella is something about the hierarchy. It's a really unusual thing that we find. We study nonprofits. Well, this is actually a for-profit company. It's a private for-profit philanthropy consulting firm. That means they cater to some of the biggest left-wing foundations in America, including George Soros' Open Society Foundations or the Ford Foundation. But the really unusual thing is that they run a network of 4 in-house nonprofits. These are nonprofits like the one I work for instance, that are staffed by Arabella staffers whose boards of directors are all interlocking and controlled by Arabella. So these are Arabella creatures that they themselves run hundreds of fake groups attacking conservatives on every issue from healthcare to gun control to abortion on demand. I mean, you name it, and they've run a campaign on it.
Right. Okay. So talk to us about how they operate, because these pop-up groups, for example, how are they able to get their money? And I'm looking at some of the data you guys have compiled. It's well north of $1 billion over the last 5 or 6 years, and I'm sure that number is probably even higher. How do they get that into the political bloodstream?
Yeah, so the money ultimately originates with major foundations. But the reason we call them dark money groups is because they don't have to, Arabella, that is, doesn't have to report its donors. So the way we've charted it out is major foundations like Ford, for instance, since 2013 have given them $1.6 billion to this Arabella empire. They cut checks to Arabella. In exchange, Arabella uses its in-house nonprofits to sponsor slick websites. They're designed to look like nonprofits. They have donate buttons, everything, really nice logos, but effectively all they are political tools designed to push a particular ideological agenda. If you donate to these groups, for instance, you're donating to Arabella. You probably just don't know it because they don't disclose that. They don't like to tell you who's really running it, and they want to fool you into thinking this is a group, for instance, Demand Justice, which we track at the Supreme Court, attacking Brett Kavanaugh. So if you are a gullible liberal, you may think, hey, I don't like Brett Kavanaugh. I want to support this group that's attacking him and keeping him from the Supreme Court bench. Well, in reality, you're contributing to a multi-billion-dollar empire that runs hundreds of groups, but you don't know that. And the way it works, too, is Arabella will use its cash from Ford, not tell you who's funding these particular websites, and then go ahead and run campaigns that we call pop-up groups because they can appear one day like a website can. They can attack conservatives and be gone a month later or a day later, however quickly the campaign ends. So it's rapid, lightning-fast campaign maneuvers that these guys all run from a shadowy for-profit firm in D.C.
Wow. And so why is that necessary? Why is it so necessary for them? Why do they feel they need to be to mask themselves, to shroud themselves?
Well, I think that the obvious advantage is that it's just really fast. Creating a new nonprofit can take months or years, right, going through all the paperwork. Well, if you do it this way, say you're a Ford Foundation or you're one of these major left-wing donors like Tom Steyer, your advantage is that you can go to a predefined network, this whole infrastructure of groups that all you have to do is tell them what you want to accomplish. Say, I want to attack Republicans in the 2018 midterms on their views of Obamacare and health care. Cut a fat check to Arabella, and it handles the rest. It'll provide staffing. It'll provide a cool website. It'll buy the campaign ads. It'll do everything from start to finish. And all you have to do is sit back and watch the effects fall out, as opposed to going through the messy process of creating your own nonprofits, getting attorneys, getting lobbyists, doing all of that hard work that normal groups would do, plus having to disclose all of that information, who your donors were, et cetera. So this way you can take a group like these major foundations that, see themselves as these very, very intellectual and creme de la creme liberals who don't want to get tied up in the messiness of everyday politics. You can keep that image going and allow the grubby guys at Arabella to run your campaigns for you without dirtying your fingers.
Yeah, and this is so you see how the strategy would work, because then that means folks like you and me who are doing this for a living, we have to familiarize ourselves with what's seemingly a new group or a new entity or a new outlet or new individuals. And it just keeps us having to work so much harder to understand who we're going up against and what they have, what sort of resources they have behind them. And so it's sort of a genius thing. I always give the left credit for being genius in the way they were able to carry out their nefarious plots. So let's talk about who's connected to Arabella. It's founded by a guy named Eric Kessler, who is he's I love that in the article we include some of his bio. He's a serial entrepreneur who started, led, and advised organizations pursuing social change across the country and around the globe. He's a Clinton crony. This is a guy who worked for the Clinton Foundation. He's a Clinton Foundation guy, which was, remember, Charity Navigator couldn't even rate the Clinton Foundation because it was so corrupt. They couldn't even give it a score. But if you read his bio, you would think this is just one of the great philanthropists of our time.
Yes, exactly. A self-made self-starter, right? Yeah, you nailed it. He was on the advisory board of that short-lived Clinton Global Initiative, which is no longer around because of corruption reasons, right? Closed for all the bad press it was getting. But Kessler himself actually was in the Clinton administration, too. So this guy, to the best of our knowledge, is pretty shadowy. To the best of our knowledge, he was an old time in the 90s and late 80s, environmentalist activist. So he worked for the League of Conservation Voters, which itself, funny enough, has been criticized by liberal groups like Politico as a dark money heavyweight. I'm quoting that.
Wow.
But he comes out of that kind of network of environmental activism, joined the Clinton administration working for the Department of Interior under then Secretary Bruce Babbitt, where presumably he met many of these people. And then, like you said, give him credit. He struck on one genius thing, founded Arabella in around 2005, and realized there's this massive potential to build this kind of pop-up empire that, frankly, nobody has done before or since. It's kind of like you said, we study this stuff for a living. I've never seen anything approaching this on the right. Libertarians and conservatives,
yes,
I don't even think we could imagine this sort of thing on our own. And it's funny, the way we found it actually was going through the motions of our normal day-to-day stuff, tracking left-wing activists. I found groups like Demand Justice, because I will go to these Supreme Court rallies to observe who shows up, and think, I don't know who these guys are. Well, check out the normal sources like the IRS. None of its lists include a group called Demand Justice or any of the 300-plus Arabella pop-up groups. Instead, you go to their website, if you dig really deeply into things like their privacy policy, you'll find that there's weird sources to things like this mysterious new venture fund. Well, good luck finding a group called the New Venture Fund on Google. There's about 1 billion of those out there, and they're all investment pools. So if you trace back these groups, you realize it's like pulling back the veil on this mysterious empire that is literally hundreds of people big and billions of dollars strong. And it's pretty extraordinary that for about 15 years, he's managed to keep this under wraps. Got to give him credit for that.
Sure. Again, we're talking to Hayden Ludwig. He's an investigative researcher at the Capital Research Center, who are great supporters of us at Breitbart. And we've got a new series that we're rolling out. First article appears today on a group called Arabella, which is Arabella Advisors. It's a dark money group that creates these pop-up nonprofits. And the design is to fund left-wing causes, and it's to do it with this sort of cloak of mystery and somewhat anonymity, but it's all kind of traced back to the same group, and they've got a little system that they have in place that allows for these nonprofits to pop up, and it's a way of getting money and getting it into the bloodstream. And let's give some examples, Hayden, of where you would have seen Arabella's influence. We're seeing it with defending Obamacare. We're seeing it with, as you mentioned, Brett Kavanaugh. What are some other examples of it? What are they up to?
Sure. So I mentioned that they run on numerous issues. Healthcare is probably the biggest one we saw most recently because of the 2018 midterms. Democrats and liberals tried to spin that and may have been successful in, who knows, as the healthcare election. Well, we tracked down about 15, that's 15 different groups run by Arabella. This is going through individual searches to find all these groups. So they don't make it clear at all. Well, many of these groups, about a dozen of those groups, were actually fake state-based groups. I have pictures on our website, capitalresearch.org, but what they are is they're groups with names like North Carolinians for a Fair Economy or Ohioans for a Fair Start. They're fake names with websites that are quite literally carbon copies of one another with just different colors and slightly different logos. And when you hold them up next to each other, as I've done, you see quite literally this is the same person who's produced this over and over again. But even then, it doesn't stop there. They had national level groups. My favorite one was Healthcare for America Now. Now, your listeners may be aware of HCAN, we call it, and kind of some of their efforts, because about 9-10 years ago, Healthcare for America Now was key in pushing Obamacare. It was the group who basically you drew on every source of the left. So the SEIU for lobbying and advocacy, a mysterious group called Atlantic Philanthropies, based in Bermuda, of all places, speaking of dark money, who was one of the main funders of HCAN. Well, HCAN was the group that was responsible for kind of coalescing the campaign in around 2010 to ultimately force Congress to pass Obamacare. It was the group that put the pressure on Congress and congressional Democrats to finally get their act together and push through Obamacare in March 2010. Well, HCAN died after that, but we found it was revived as a kind of zombie group now run by Arabella, a group that did not create it, but has somehow managed to, clearly through high-level negotiations, take this group under its wing. Well, HCAN was launching barrages of media ads and attacks on Republicans, calling them anti-healthcare, attacking them for attacking little old ladies' healthcare, Medicare, that sort of thing. You can imagine the kind of things that they would say. But that was just one of about 15 groups doing this nationwide, buying Facebook ads, buying airtime, and all along the way telling you that they had names like Healthcare for America Now. Well, no, it's actually New Venture Fund or 1630 Fund, groups run by Arabella Advisors. But you wouldn't know that based on the reporting that they give.
And this is all about AstroTurf. This is all about a fake grassroots. This is all about creating the feeling of energy and momentum and movement, and making the public and corporations and the culture feel like something is happening. It's really all fake. It's all AstroTurf. It's all propped up by, it sounds like, the same group of billionaires and of political influencers that we've been hearing about our entire lives, Hayden.
Oh, you're right about that. I mean, and the way they lay out their groups, their campaigns, just shows you. Sometimes it's actually kind of ridiculous. So some of these groups we found, if you go to their coalition lists, they'll give you about 40 impressive-looking names, things like the AFL-CIO, for instance, or Planned Parenthood. But then some of the ones you don't know, with names like, North Carolinians for a Fair Economy, very generic names. Well, it turns out that would be Arabella pop-up groups endorsing Arabella pop-up groups, which then turn around and endorse other Arabella pop-up groups. So you take a list. I actually took a list of 40 of these groups and found that only about 30 of them were real groups. The rest of them all share a single office space down the street from my office at Arabella's headquarters, right?
Unbelievable.
But they go on further than that. The way these groups are laid out, I mentioned that Arabella runs 4 real nonprofits that then themselves run all these fake groups. Well, one of those is a 501c3. The other one's a 501c4. The only key difference you have to know is one can do a lot more lobbying than the other. So they keep it around to run their lobbying arms. So what we find is things like All Above All, which is one Arabella group, and then All Above All Action Fund. Well, the action fund is obviously the lobbying arm, right? Well, they run these two things in tandem so that they can maximize donations to the 501c3 arm, since people can write that off on their taxes. And then at the same time, they can maximize their lobbying potential through the action fund. And so they run these things as pairs most of the time. And the funny thing is, they don't always give you names that make it clear that they're a pair. Demand Justice is that anti-Kavanaugh group I mentioned earlier. Well, Demand Justice's secret research arm, if you will, its education arm, what they would call it, is a group called Fix the Court. Well, funny enough, Demand Justice never mentions that relationship, and yet they cite Fix the Court's stunning research all the time on why the Supreme Court shouldn't rule this way or that way on a particular issue, why Kavanaugh was a bad fit for the court. Well, yeah, no wonder you're citing these guys. It's probably down the hall from your office.
Yeah, it's you. It's you. Yeah, right. It's the next cubicle over. That's right. Yeah, the person sitting next to me in the office building. It's a yes. This is
my boss as an expert, not telling you he's my boss.
and Hayden, this is increasingly how this town is operating, and it's so distressing. Which is why it's great to have researchers like you around, investigative researcher, the Capital Research Center. They've got a new series coming out of Breitbart News. The first piece runs today on Arabella Advisors. Arabella Advisors, a shadowy dark money group that is propping up all this AstroTurf and trying to move the country left. And they're going to have an impact if we don't stand up to them. That's what we're doing here. Thanks, Hayden. I really appreciate it. Come back when we have a few of these pieces up. We'll check back in with you and we'll talk about some of them.
Will do. Thank you.
Appreciate that. We'll be right back. We'll be right back.